it's all artificial intelligence, which you got me into. You convinced me to use some years ago. Okay, so we've got Josh Tsui here. Thank you so much, by the way, for doing this. This is way below your station. But
give me a break. Give me a break.
Josh has a wonderful background, and I'm sure he can tell you a lot more about it, starting with Midway, and there are probably a lot of great stories there. Moving on to EA, Josh ran the video game company a number of years that made the Tony Hawk video games, Robomoto, then moved into the experiential gaming space and created a documentary about Midway Games. And now Josh is at DePaul University, where I came from, and Josh is running the Jarvis Innovation Center. Is it Innovation and Collaboration Center? There's a name in there. The Jarvis Center is how I think of it.
There's a really long full name that nobody uses, so we just call it either the Jarvis Center or the Jarvis Innovation Center.
There we go. Okay, so now Josh is doing that in academia at DePaul University. And what did I miss? Josh? Tell everybody else what else you need to know.
I think you covered the broad strokes there. The experiential design space was after doing many games and such, and that really involved a lot of location-based type of entertainment and venues and such. So we did things like take over the floor of a Washington, D.C. observatory and designed it out with all kinds of experiences. So there's almost like Disney Imagineering type work. So, and that kind of led to a lot of the initiatives that we're doing over at DePaul now, which is really interesting.
That's cool. I want to talk a little bit about that maybe leading in, which is like placemaking, right? And, I've been conducting some of these interviews for the podcast, and the thing that keeps coming up is that a place, like an actual place, is important for an initiative. You can have an initiative as an idea, but having it have a home and physical space is interesting. I was just in Portland for a conference in a semi-abandoned mall, and there was actually an arcade there. And I was trying to talk to my kids about how special it was to be able to play arcade games in a mall back in the day. And they asked me what a mall was, not even just what an arcade was. And I know that's probably near and dear to your heart as well, but that's a place. That's a place where games are played. I wonder, if with all that rambling context that I just gave you, what's the importance of a place, whether it's an arcade or it's an innovation center, or it's, a place that you're putting together for an experience for people?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point you brought up, because your kids not knowing what a mall is blows my Gen X mind, right? And so, I grew up practically living in a mall, and by extension, the whole arcade scene. This was in the 80s, and so by extension, the whole arcade scene, everything was all kind of centered around that. And for myself, in my point of view, having places like a mall or an arcade where you're physically out of your house is such a completely different experience. Let's focus on video game. Obviously, the vast majority of people now play video games at home. You're entertaining yourself, and even people watching movies. More people watching movies at home now than in theaters. And that's fine and works and everything, but you're not really taking yourself out physically from somewhere and experiencing something. So you're really going, in my opinion, you're getting half the experience of really being immersed in something. And so in the case of the arcades, if you want to go play a video game, you physically have to leave the house to go play a game, and that game is in a cabinet, and that cabinet almost acts as like a portal or a cubicle around that kind of surrounds you a little bit. If you think about a game like Pac-Man, where you're looking down at the screen and there's almost like horse blinders around the screen, your level of concentration is just insane at that point, and you become very immersed in that game, even though it's super simple compared to games now. So I liken it to when people say that if you handwrite notes as you're listening to a lecture, let's say, you're going to absorb the information a lot more. I think that the physical interaction makes such a big difference and such. So when you talk about place, and you're in a physical area or physical space that's not your home and such, I just think that it becomes more of a piece of memory that is going to stick with you. And I think that's why you'll get a lot of people my age and the Gen X generation who talk so fondly of things like the malls and arcades and things like that, because heavily imprinted on us because of all of that mental and physical interaction at the same time.
So with that as context, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like, is that part of what this is a leading question I'm realizing as I'm saying it, is because I'm going to ask you, is that part of the motivation for the development of, like, why have an innovation center? Is it important? Can innovation happen anywhere? Probably, but why have a
Sure.
place for that? What's the importance of that?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, technically innovation can happen anywhere. If somebody, it's kind of like education in many ways. Like you can technically learn anything off the internet if you really wanted to. When I produced my documentary, I learned about documentary editing just off of YouTube videos and such, and I just got enough information to be able to pull it off. But the thing about an innovation center is that you're getting information, but you're also getting interaction with people. And I think the best example why places like innovation centers and just places are important is that you're going somewhere with a focus, but you're opening yourself up to what I like to call happy accidents.
Mm.
Random things that can happen because you're in a different physical space. You're opening yourself up to that randomness. And if you look at just life in general, so much of what we learn are things that are completely unplanned. And so if you're not going to places, let's say if you're doing everything in front of the computer or any type of screen that you have at home, everything is very focused. You know what you want, and that's what you're going to get. You go somewhere and you go watch a video, and YouTube is going to, via the algorithms, keep feeding you the same things over and over again. And there's nothing, well, I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong with it. There's plenty of things that are wrong with it. But its focus is fine. But the thing is that when you go to a place like Innovation Center or any type of place, you're going there with intent, with certain intentions and such, and you're going to find it. But because of the random nature of other people around or other technology that might happen to be there, even the layout of furniture can inspire you. You're inundated with a lot of different things to hit your senses. And those accidents that come out of it are ultimately probably what's going to make whatever you're trying to do much more interesting.
Yeah, I like that. There's a concept of, I think it's third spaces or third places.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this? Yeah. Where, most of our time is spent at home or at work, and both, or in the case of a student in a classroom, I suppose. And both of these are highly controlled environments. At home, we're able to control the
Yep.
temperature of our house and what we're exposed to. And when we go into a classroom or in a workplace, we know what to expect as well. The expectations are laid out. And so the idea of third spaces being maybe a coffee house, even, but other places where we don't have as much control over the environment is incredibly important for learning. Something, by the way, we lost a lot during the pandemic. As I'm thinking about it, there was no space for that. And so, we try to do that online, and that didn't really work out very
Yeah.
well.
No,
Um,
yeah, you're
yeah.
totally right. During the pandemic, it drove me crazy to be at home in my, basement office. And so I ended up going to the library, going to coffee shops. And you didn't mean that I had people near me or anything, but I just needed to be able to see life happening.
Yeah.
And it's just so important. Just again, it's just, even if things are just very passively happening outside of you, being able to use all your senses to look around things and just see what's going on, it's things that are completely unplanned. It was just so important for me.
Yeah. So what's interesting is in developing these kinds of places, you're kind of creating your own version of a sandbox. It's the magic circle that they teach in game design. You're creating this, you're curating it though, as the person who runs this center. That's
Mhm.
your job. You're to set the conditions for that space. I wonder, as you've been developing the innovation center over the last year and a half, what how have you gone about doing that? What are the mental models that you're going through, and like yes, I want to expose people to this. No, we're not going to get the giant inflatable wavy arm tube thing. We're going to put this in here instead. What are some of the challenges that you've faced, and what does your decision making process look like when it comes to what you want to expose students to, or how you want to curate that third space?
Yeah, when I first started working at the center, I'm very new to academia. I never worked, at a university before. So I came in with certain assumptions that I had in my mind that may work for the Innovation Center. So, but I kind of came in with a blank slate. And so the way I started off was, let's find out what is going on around the center itself, not the center inside of it, but what else is going on. And so one of the unusual things about the Jarvis Innovation Center is that it's servicing three kind of different schools of the CDM, which is the College of Computing and Digital Media, comprises of the School of Cinematic Arts, which is the film school, the School of Design, and a School of Computing. And so those are three kind of different schools that have some through lines between them, but they all have their own different initiatives and agendas. And so the Innovation Center is servicing three different types of students. And so I wanted to take probably like the first year or so just to find out what are the needs. Like I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. What's going on in each of those schools, and how do I help extend it and make a center that will get people to work with each other? I think it's a very long way of me saying, what can we put in the center that is going to apply to not just a film student, but to somebody who's, let's say, a UX designer?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that anything that we do there, whether it's technology or events and such, can apply to at least two of those three schools. The whole idea is trying to get students and faculty members to break down the silos and think more in terms of interdisciplinary thoughts. Because if I just put in film equipment, well, who cares? There's already a film school that has all that equipment. Why would we need to do this? Right. But it's like if I put in equipment that suddenly a game designer who knows Unreal can learn a little bit about filmmaking, that technology or gear or whatever, or event that we're doing applies to both of those schools. That's what we're more interested in. So we kind of treaded lightly for a while just to see what gets some interest. And I came in with some of my own thoughts. So we kind of seeded a lot of technology and events based off of my background, right, just to start off with. And so that was the first year. And then the second year, we looked at what worked and what didn't work, and then start kind of bringing in more feedback from different students and faculty members who use the center a lot and try to figure out what they needed. So it's a growing process, and we keep adding more as we're going along as the center evolves. But like I said, the center is about a year and a half years old. Year and a half. It's only a year and a half years old. And so we're just now starting to get our solid footing on which direction we want to go with. So yeah, it's a long way of me just saying we're still trying to figure it out, but we're starting to kind of bring in more feedback from people who've experienced the center, since we've opened.
I'm interested in a lot of what you said there, but in two things in particular. You talked about how the first year you started off with your background.
Yeah.
And also by interviewing people and trying to figure out what they want, which is, of course, smart. I think anybody who makes products or services knows that the place that you start is by finding problems that your audience, your personas have. But then there's always a part of you that goes into something. It has to, otherwise it's not interesting. And so one thing I'm interested in is, as the center moves forward and you gain all the feedback that you're getting, what's the part of you that's like the unwavering part? Or, I've referred to it in the past when I'm creating a program as the hill will die on, meaning I don't care what anybody else says. We're doing this one thing, and then I'll listen to everybody else and everything else that they say. But this one thing is in some way, shape, or form going to last. So that's one. I'm interested in that. And then you also said you looked at what worked and what didn't work. I think we too often talk about or think we only can, what we'll learn is from what did work. I wonder if you could tell me some of the what didn't works as what. It's not even a two-part question. Two totally different questions I've got for you. I'm glad that you're writing them down. But the one is, what is the part of you that will always remain, do you think, in the space? And then the other is, what didn't work for you in that first year and a half?
Oh man, you have to give me a second to think about that, because there's multiple examples. So I guess there are many hills I'm more than happy to die on. I think the thing that comes to mind, to be honest with you, is but what is, yeah, I'm not sure if this is the ultimate, hill to die on thing, but it goes back to a long pause. The AI is going to have to fix
The
this
AI is
long
going
pause.
to solve that for you.
I think one of the most important things to me is basically getting students to understand the point, how important it is to be very interdisciplinary in nature, creating projects that spans different industries. So, which I guess that leads me to another thing that is a very big passion of mine is making sure that anything you do at the center has some. I would like to. Hold on a second.
Well, I think that's interesting what you're talking about with interdisciplinary nature. I think for people who come from industry, that seems like a normal thing. But
Yeah,
when you enter academia, particularly when you enter like academia in a liberal arts institution, people who are teaching and running programs, they don't think like that at all because they're a PhD in physics who got a master's degree in physics, who got a bachelor's degree in physics. And if you talk to them about what they do, it's that they do physics. And if you ask them, and I've had this conversation before, not with all faculty members, but with some, if you ask them if they want to collaborate with you on something because you see a connection to physics with what you're doing, they will tell you, do you understand what the liberal arts are about? They're about like people with deep experience in a discipline, teaching on that discipline and pushing that discipline forward. And that's within that discipline. There's no multidiscipline or cross
yeah,
discipline. There is my discipline and your discipline, and never the twain shall meet. So I think when you're saying that, it's a foreign concept to a certain group of people, and that is a hill to die on in some ways, right?
yeah. So you're basically reading my mind. Thank God you've extracted that out of my head because that's what I was trying to get at is and this is like the thing that I will, commit to, but it's also the thing that is a work in progress that I'm still working through is that I'm very industry focused. And so my thing is, I want students to come in, discover the whole concept of interdisciplinary, thinking. So that way, when they're out of school, that they are prepared to take on anything that comes to them.
Right.
So I came from a film background. I was a film student in college, but I ended up working in video games for 30 years. And I attribute my career in video games into the fact that I learned a lot of different things when I was in college. It wasn't just film. I just happened to get into computer graphics in my senior year, and I learned all these other things. So I was able to combine all these skills. And so, not to toot my own horn, but I think that that was a defining moment for me. And that's something that I really want people to understand that, yes, you may be a film student that knows exactly how to use this camera or this piece of software to do your work. But guess what? When you get out in the real world, they don't care about that because that technology is going to change.
Yep.
Everything that they learned is going to change, but you need to be open minded enough to be able to tackle on
That's
anything
right.
that's new out there. Less than 5 years ago, the concept of a person working in film needing to understand what a game engine is, it was just unthinkable. But
Mm.
now that's like the industry standard. Like when I was in film school, my biggest specialty was called negative conforming, which is cutting the negative of film to be so that way a film can be printed off of it to be released in the theaters. Okay, I was like the master of that. I learned that like crazy when I was in film school. And guess what? Like when digital film came along, that's all gone. It's completely obsolete. So that's always on my mind. It's just like, how do I initiate projects, or how do I bring in speakers, or how do I use a center as this platform to get people to understand that you need to learn a little bit of everything. Doesn't mean that you have to master them all, but you need to be exposed to them. You need to be exposed to people in the industry that have gone through this. So that way, when they come out of school, they know what to expect. They're not completely, confused by the real world. So
Right.
following up on that, I wouldn't say what went wrong, but it's more like what's been a work in progress is exactly what you said, is getting other people to understand this. I don't think the students really have a problem with this at all. But like you said, there are people who have been working, let's say they're faculty for 20, 30 years and such, and they know what they know, they know it very well. It completely threw me off when I realized exactly what you said, that they want to just focus on their thing. They don't necessarily want to, they don't have the time, and I don't blame
Right.
them, to really go off and go in different directions and add
Right.
other things to their students' experiences. And so that's a big challenge for us, is to be the place for that to happen. Because I don't want to burden other people
Right.
with our initiatives. And so trying to figure out, well, how do we thread that needle where we want to make sure that other people in the university are involved, and we want to do big collaborative and innovative things that's going to take multiple groups to get together, because everyone's busy and such. So our challenge is, how do we get this going? How do we become, how do we create that funnel, and we help control it and make sure that these things happen within the system and not overburdening others.
Right. That's right. The incentive structures aren't necessarily there for academics to work outside of their discipline, because you have to write papers and publish in places within your discipline. You have to do work, give conference talks within your discipline. And
Yeah.
you're not going to find somebody who's in philosophy speaking at an association of computing and machinery conference necessarily.
Exactly.
But at the same time, if you are a computer science student and all you learn is computer science, and you go into the job market and you're practicing that discipline, your boss is never going to ask you to read Kant, is the way that I've put it. There's so much value in that. So if you're able to at least get a taste of that in higher ed before you move off and work in that discipline, even better. I wonder
Yeah.
as we're thinking of like the problems that you're, not problems, challenges that you're outlining, to go back to the other side of what your goals are and how you measure those goals. And I think we were talking about this a little bit before we hit record. How do you measure success? What do you look at success as a year and a half in, keeping in mind you're a year and a half in, so these change over time? What are the things that you're looking at in the center as, I hate to use key performance indicators, but basically key performance indicators, right?
I think there are a few different ones. The easiest one is just because the center being so young, we're in kind of what I call growth mode. And so really it's just traffic. Seeing, are there more students coming in, more unique students coming in? Where are they coming in from? And just seeing that growth. So that's super important for me, because when you get the traffic in, then you can get the information out to more people, and then they get it out to their peers. So that's a super easy KPI. I think the one that's still in progress, but I'm starting to see growth in it, is student projects that are very interdisciplinary in nature. And I know the term interdisciplinary is kind of broad and such, but the way I look at it is, are there more projects from any of these schools that are cross collaborations with other students? And so, a great example is, a couple of School of Design students created this kiosk, like, is this like this kiosk system where it was using AI. People would put in a photo of themselves into this kiosk, and then it would, these touch screens would show what AI can do to their memories and stuff. It's all about, the whole concept was how, will people's memories be affected by AI in the future? So they did this really cool museum exhibit. And the nice thing about it was that I saw the work they were doing, and we ended up helping them out at the center, because this was a UX project that involved AI, that involved hardware and programming and game engine and everything. And when we saw that, it's like, this is great, because it's designed with technology, and there was some forward thinking to it, and there was fabrication involved with it. That was the other part that I'm super interested in, is it's not just software or content, but how do you create physical objects that people can interact with? So this project was a great example of it. And when I saw that project, the students, they work at the center a lot. And my hope was that just being around the centers and talking about things like museum exhibits and and fabrication and even arcade machines and stuff that kind of inspired these students to go in that direction. So we're starting to see more and more of that, where people are taking the technology we have at the center, and we have a lot of random technology there, but getting inspired by it. Early on, and this is still a work in progress, but early on, we decided we're going to buy technology that may or may not be related to any project that's going on. So and this is a little bit of me putting myself out there, where it's like I see something that's coming up with some emerging technology and I find it interesting, and in my head, if I can figure out that, hey, this might inspire students from these 3 different schools to give it a try and learn something and maybe experiment with it, if it hits some of these targets, then we're going to go ahead and just buy it without even knowing if somebody is going to use it or not. Because if we put enough toys in the sandbox, let's say, and the kids come in and play, they might discover something that they didn't even think about. And that's another big goal of ours, is to make sure that this technology is there, it's accessible. You're really trying to democratize some of this emerging technology by being super accessible to them.
Give me the most used and least used. And on top of that, I think maybe what you think should be used, but nobody quite is yet.
Oh, man.
I interviewed Jake Duraka from Northwestern. He's episode 1 this season, I guess is what I'm calling it. And Jake talked about his love for this new 3D printer that he's got that prints like 5 times faster than other and we geeked out on 3D printing for maybe about 10 minutes. And I thought that was really interesting, though, because there's the stuff that you see and people aren't using it and you're like, that's a big miss. There's the stuff that you've got where people are using the heck out of it. And then there's that one thing off in the corner where you're like, why aren't you guys using this thing? This is like the coolest thing ever. And I just want somebody to pay attention to it.
Oh, that's a good question. I would say the thing that's being the most used are the VR headsets. And I'm actually kind of surprised by that, because VR has been around for a while and the hype has kind of died down a little bit, but the usefulness of the technology for various things is still very high. So that gets used a lot, and a lot of it is because we have a lot of game design students using the center. And this past year, Alan Turner, the chair of the games department, he's working on this really interesting VR project. So he has a lot of students helping him out on that. But I think that kind of has helped rekindle interest in it, just because you can do so many different things with it, not just games. So I think people are kind of rediscovering that. So that's probably the most used. I think the least used, but I think has the greatest potential. And I think it's only least used because we just got it recently and it's not super well known that we have it. And I think we need to get some case studies out there so people can get inspired by it, is this virtual production setup that we got in the center. Everyone knows what virtual production is, using Unreal Engine for compositing videos and things like that. But when I look at that technology, it can be used for so many other things. So I have it in my head of how it can be used, and I just need to basically get one project done with this technology that isn't an obvious virtual production thing, to get people inspired to look at it and say, oh, shoot, I didn't realize we can do that in here. And so a good example is using the same tech. We can basically pre-visualize, let's say, an entire scene of a movie. So if a student wants to storyboard something, or basically, pre-visualize a film that they're thinking about, they can come into the center, use this virtual production tech that we have, where we have sensors on the camera. So people can basically use a real camera, but record all the motion of it, including the focal length and the zoom and everything, all this data that they can reuse inside of a game engine, and bring in virtual actors using our mocap system that uses it, that's all camera based, and basically film something digitally as if it was in real life. And I'm probably doing a very bad description of this, but basically, they can record all the motions of an actor, all the camera moves and everything, go take it into the game engine and look at everything and change however they want, decide that they want to change the camera angles and stuff, and basically come out with their entire film digitally, look at and edit it, and look at it and say, this is the film I want to make, and then go off and shoot it with real actors on real sets later on.
I see.
Takes all the guesswork out of things. And so it's almost like taking an animation approach to live action filmmaking.
I see.
And there's just a lot of power with that. And I can explain it to people, but it's not until we just have somebody do it to show, hey, this is what we're talking about.
So it's like a more advanced step in prototyping. It's you start
Yeah.
out with sketching and storyboarding and all that sort of stuff, and you get higher and higher fidelity as you progress through it. And this sounds like a new tool to insert in the high fidelity prototyping phase of cinema,
Yeah,
where
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
you don't have to storyboard at all. That's the thing. Is
right.
being a filmmaker,
Oh, yeah, right.
one of the most frustrating thing is I know the shots I want, but if I want a storyboard, it's going to be me drawing stick figures, or if I'm a professional, Hollywood type, I'd hire a storyboarder and such. But you're still not getting exactly what you want. It's all in 2D, a piece of paper. Here,
Yeah.
it's basically you can play around with anything you want, all virtually, and then you have a completed piece of video that then you can just shoot towards.
Interesting. When you were talking about getting case studies out there, it sounds like this is Josh making the case. You're going to have
Yeah.
to take it upon yourself to build these things. I'm wondering, is that typically how you find yourself getting people engaged with technology, or are there processes or systems that can be put in place to encourage people to take those kinds of chances? Or is it, because I found myself in this position
Yeah.
often as well, where it's like there's this thing, and uh, uh, maybe it's hubris, but it's like I'm like, nobody sees it except for me, and so I'm going to show them this thing, and then they're going to use it, and that works oftentimes, but it's also draining. It's
Yeah.
it's it's like
It's not scalable, that's for sure.
right, right. So I wonder, as you've been developing the center out over the last year and a half, what are some things that people have glommed onto independently, and why, and how do you go about building those systems to allow people to muddle their way or tinker their way over to this piece of technology you're talking about now, or really other things as
Yeah.
well? Yeah.
I think there are a few different ways. So, like in the example I just gave, that's something that it's just complicated enough that I feel like, okay, I need to just get this going, at least get the beginnings of it going, and basically make it an internal project for the center, and then find, the right students or faculty members to partner up with. And they can end up having it be a student project, or a project for the class, but I'd be kind of managing that, or basically being the visionary behind it. So something that's more complicated like that, I think it would have to go in that direction. I think the other way, the other thing that we've been doing, like I just kind of mentioned, is finding like-minded faculty members who are teaching class that are somewhat related to what we want to do. A great example is we had a UXD class, basically doing an internal project for the Jarvis Center that we basically commissioned out. And so
Mm.
on our end of things, it's still us setting up the initiative for it, but at that point it's very high level. Like, this is what we want. Do you think your class would be interested in doing this?
Mm.
Because it's that at that point it becomes kind of like a client project, even though we're
Right.
all internal. And so that worked out really well. So we ended up having a group of students create an AI motion capture system, just using off the shelf hardware. And our high level, goal for them was we just want to do motion capture. We want to experiment with motion capture and utilizing just regular webcams and computers, nothing expensive or anything. How far can we push the technology? What can you find that'll work on here? Work with something like this. But that's it. That's all we told them. And so we found a faculty member who had a class that would work well with this, and she found the students, and then that became the project for that quarter. So
Wow.
a little collaboration with faculty, with like-minded faculty, is super important for us, and be that as kind of like a pipeline for some of these initiatives.
Interesting. As you're talking about collaboration with faculty, I'm thinking back to a couple other interviews that I've done for this podcast, and they always revisit the idea of partnerships. I think it seems like when you are at the head of an innovative initiative within an institution, particularly an older institution that goes about its business in a certain way, developing those kinds of partnerships is important, whether it's with line and rank folks, faculty,
Mhm.
students, but also having those partnerships with administrators, with people who are exposed to tribal knowledge and understand
Yeah.
the unwritten laws of how the institution functions and things like that. I'm wondering, as you've been developing this space over the last year and a half, what are some of the key, you've talked about faculty, but are there other kind of key partnerships or groups that you've looked to within the institution that have helped you? And why do you think that is? Like, what is it about
Mm.
that group or that person that has helped your innovation initiative at DePaul move forward?
Yeah, there's been quite a few people that we've been working with, and they all come in from different angles. Believe it or not, the career services office has been great in
Hmm.
terms of collaboration. I think it's because of the industry focus that
Mm.
we tend to have and such. And so when we bring in, let's say, speakers from different industries and things like that, we always get the career center people involved with that, or at least aware of it, because it's not like they're going to come in and start talking about recruiting to these folks who are coming in, but just basically they'll, if they see that there's a good connection there and they want to somehow get involved. So there's a bit of an introduction. So later on down the road, some things can come out of it.
Mm.
They'll come in down to do it. But a lot of times they'll also they might be working with people with other companies, let's say, already and they have like relations where DePaul interns are working there on a regular basis and such. They might come to us and say, hey, you know what, they're interested in whatever this and the other thing that seems to be related to what we're doing at the Jarvis Center. They'll contact us, because we
Right.
built that relationship with them. So that's been a very good partnership. And I can't remember the department's name, so my apologies.
Yeah.
There are certain departments that basically work with company for grants and sponsorships and things like that.
Yeah.
There are that want to get involved with universities in some ways, and so we make a point of telling them, hey, here are some initiatives we have going on. We have this thing called the Jarvis Challenge that's coming up in the fall. It's kind of like a Shark Tank type of pitch contest. And we mentioned that to this one department. They said, oh, you know what? There's a company that we work with that would probably be interested in being a part of this. And so it was just an idea on our end of things. But now that we got them involved and they're talking with some corporate sponsorships and such, now it forces us to become more serious about it.
Right. Right.
It was just an initial idea at first, but now like, they're forcing us to give us some momentum, which is great. It's kind of, kicks us in the ass to take it, as seriously as possible. But groups like that have been great to be around. But in general, to kind of go back to like-minded, faculty members and stuff, there, I've been very fortunate that we've had quite a few different people from all over DePaul wanting to work with us and who are very like-minded and such, and they understand the importance of, hey, we need to at least get an understanding of what's going on out there. Let's say with technology. I mean, the hot word right now is AI, obviously, and we're getting
Yeah.
people from the humanity department contacting us saying, you know what, we would like to know more about what's going on with AI, or we would like to know what's going on with immersive tech VR. It's interesting. I'm doing a workshop for the humanities people in the fall for VR because I happened to show one of them a documentary that was made for VR that was incredibly well done. It really got the point of the subject matter because you're immersed in it. And it blew her away. And so she asked, like, can you come in and do a demo for every faculty member here? Because,
Mm.
you know, because we see this as a great teaching tool. And so this is outside of CDM, but it's like it totally makes sense. It's like, people should be aware of what's out there. And in this case, the technology that's out there that may further what their goals are. So yeah, so like I said, the partnerships kind of go all over the place. And again, I'm in that growth mode phase where it's like I'll talk to anybody about anything, because you just never know what can come out of it.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like, as well on the administrative side, or on the side of people who have, in sales, they would call it like access to power. The people who make who can
Yeah.
get who could impede you if they chose to. It sounds like you've got the support that you need to be successful and make these partnerships with other faculty members and outside partners and things like that, which is, an important component of running these kinds of initiatives, I would think, within these larger institutions. If you don't have that support, if you have people who are invested in business being done as usual, then it's really hard to develop these kinds of partnerships that might seem, although they're not, seem strange or foreign to people who are, used to business being done a certain way. I mean, do you find, like, another leading question, I guess, but is that you're getting that kind of support? Is that, how do you gain and sustain that kind of support, from the people who are making, decisions at DePaul?
One of the big things that I asked for when I was up for this job was how much autonomy do I have with the center?
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm-hmm.
and been very fortunate in that the center was just opening. My position is completely new at DePaul. They've never had anyone like this in there. And so
Mm-hmm.
everything was new. So I've been very fortunate that they gave me so much autonomy. Basically, they basically told me, we don't know what the center is going to be. Here's a couple of high level things, but we want you to make it how you think it should be, which was amazing. Again, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think I was ever going to work in academia because I come from, for lack of a better term, I come from the tech world and even the startup world, be in positions where I have a lot of control, for better or for worse, and be able to guide the ship and be able to, at least for a certain amount of time, be left alone. Like if we're going to grow something, please just let me, run with it until
Right.
until it seems like I shouldn't be running it. And so
Right.
I got lucky in that. And so that has helped a lot in terms of obviously my job satisfaction, but also just helping the center grow and go beyond what the original idea was. I don't think that's going to happen if the center was anchored down by any particular department or school or anything like that. When I say that we're part of CDM, CDM has these three schools, and the center services all three of those schools, but is also not part of any of those schools. We're
Right.
completely an island, and so that comes with a lot of benefits because everybody, all three schools, ironically feels like they have some ownership of the center, even though none of them do, which is
Right.
perfect because they
Yes.
all come in and they want to use it, and they all have equal access to it and such. But on my end, I can tell them, well, yes, you can use it, but what you're wanting to use it for makes no sense. You have your own center to do that stuff. But if one of them comes in and says, hey, I have this event or I have this idea I want to do, and going back to what we talked about earlier, and it involves some other disciplines, fantastic. Come on in. We'll give you the world. We'll help you out on it. So that's been really great. And I think that in the long run is what's going to make the center super unique within the university itself.
Yeah, I think that's, it's important for people to feel like they are owners of a space, because that is how they come to feel like they're part of the community as well. You have to own a piece of it. You have to own a piece of the land, in order, you got to be a landowner in order to feel like you're invested in the community. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but I feel like it's okay, or at least it's getting close enough there. So, I mean, that's a rough segue, but it's a kind of segue, some kind of a segue into, like, what are some of the lessons that you've learned in the last year and a half as you've been developing the space? What are some key takeaways for other people who are developing these centers? I also kind of wonder, what are some spaces that you looked at when you were developing the center that you drew inspiration from? So kind of two-ish part question is,
Sure.
where do you look for inspiration, and what are things that you've learned kind of independently as well?
So in terms of what I've learned, going to the first part is, and it's something, it's still a work in progress for me, I'll be completely honest, is that I come from the games industry. It comes from, I come from the experiential design industry where it was very much top down type
Right.
of control. So having had my own company, being in high positions at various companies, it was basically, here's what we're doing. Now let's start making it. But it comes from the top. You have the project, and then you bring the team together to create it. With the center, and just by nature working with students, it's very much the opposite. What do students want to do, and how do we help them make it, and such? And so that was literally the opposite of what my thinking was.
Right.
Like, if I had a game studio, it wouldn't necessarily be, oh, hey, the type of game studio we had was a work for hire studio. So we would never have a situation where it's like, hey, what do people in the studio want to make? Now let's go make it. If we're like an indie game studio, that would be the case, but that's not the industry that I come from. And so coming into working at DePaul, it is like an indie game studio where it's like, what do you guys want to do? Do we have the stuff to help you make it, and such? And that totally makes sense. I still struggle with that a little bit. Not so much that the students can make their own projects. Obviously, they have to make their own projects. But in terms of moving the innovation center forward, in my mind, I have an idea of, these are the things that we need to do. These are certain projects that I want to have to hang our hats on. So when people come see the innovation center, they can see this or these projects that really represent the center. And some of them, and I'm hoping most, if not all of them, come from students. But because we're in that growth phase, I would really like to just do the top down thing for a couple of projects.
Yeah.
I have a very good idea of what would resonate really well with people. And it would also benefit the students to work on some projects like this, because the projects students want to do are great. But if there's some intervention to make them even greater, that'd be fantastic. So I have to strike this balance of, here's what I want to do. I would love to force you all to make it, but I can't do that. So how do I balance this out?
I mean, yeah, I love the analogy to the indie game studio. And having done that side of things for a while, you know that most of those studios fail. They take 5 years to make something. It is an extremely painful learning process, and to watch multiple student groups in your space, in your center, going through that,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And you know they're probably going down a path that's going to lead them towards
Yeah.
very little, if anything at all, is hard.
Yeah.
And I think that learning to set the conditions, going back to the sandbox, learning to put the right technology or the right conditions in place that maybe encourages more of them to take a better path is one approach. But I'm still figuring some of that out now that I'm at this new institution as well. How do you set the conditions so that you at least get a couple of successful projects? Or
Yeah.
how do you provide students with that advice so it's not like, here's what you should do, but it's more like, here's what I've done in the past, or here's what
Yeah.
I would do if I were in your shoes. That's a pickle. I
It
don't know
is.
where
Yeah.
I'm going with that. There's no question at the end of this.
Yeah, no, no, and I haven't solved for it. The only thing I can think of is, it's like being a parent, but being a parent to a ton of kids,
Hmm.
and because it's like, as a parent, you want to make sure your kids are doing are on the right path, but also you want them to make the mistakes that they're going to learn from, and so it's the same thing here, just on a massive scale and such. And so, just professionally though, like it's very interesting to be in this type of situation, because like you said, I'll see something and I think to myself, I could tell them something that could solve a lot of these problems, but then at the same time, is that the right thing to do? you know
Yeah.
and again, it's like, I would love to have them. There's a project I have in mind. I would love to get this going. The center can fund it, and I can probably build this team of students to work on it. but then it's like, but then it's not their project. Is that going to be worth their time? There's all these questions. And so that's been, that's just one of the weird situations that I find myself in.
So you're still figuring out what your litmus test is of should I intervene or not, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be just a constant thing. And I think it's the way it should be. It's on a per project basis on things. But that's what makes life interesting.
That's right. I mean, I think of my students oftentimes like I think about clay, and that is that, and I'm by no means claiming to be an artist who worked with the medium, but if I were, I would think of it like I was having a conversation with the material and trying to understand how it wanted to speak, and then kind of putting myself into some of that. And students are the same way. You're trying to figure out how to have a conversation with them, how they want to speak, but you're also trying to give them a path to do that in the most efficient way. Okay, just a couple more questions, and then
Sure.
I think we'll be good. We'll wrap it. I'll leave you alone for the rest of the day.
That's all right.
But you were talking about developing partnerships. You've got this new, almost kind of like a pitch competition that you're doing, and you've got a partner for that. I know that you ran Robomoto for a long time, and you had an awesome partner, I would assume, or at least I see you talk about Tony Hawk, and you've got some kind of a relationship that you've developed there as well. And relationships in general, particularly for these centers, bringing in outside voices or the outside in, seem to be critical because there's only a certain amount of knowledge that the institution internally can generate before it eats itself. How do you go about developing those partnerships or those relationships or those connections with those outside individuals or group? How do you think about that? And how do you make it worth both their while and your while when you're developing those sorts of things? Because that's something I see you as being really good at, is develop those professional connections.
I think, a lot of it, at least right now, is based off of my connections that I've cultivated throughout my career. And so a lot of the industry people are people I've known for decades now from all the various industries that I've been in. So I've been taking advantage of a lot of my friendships that I've had. And, just like with any network, it keeps growing and growing and such. And so, as long as, the people that I've been bringing in that I'm good friends with have had good experience, with the center, they'll recommend others, to come along, or they'll introduce me to, the people and such. So I've been kind of the hub of that, in terms of industry. As we develop further, my network can only go so far, and it's kind of, it's a little bit more focused and such, but obviously we want to broaden that out. And so once again, that comes down to, what other departments or administrative departments at DePaul have industry outreach, and how do I make sure that I'm available to them? So if they see a potential partner, they know that they can come to me to be someone to talk to. One of the other things that we started to do was this thing called the Jarvis Innovation Partnerships, which basically is myself acting as an agent for a few different studios or groups within DePaul. And a good example is we have a local museum that the CEO was talking to the vice president, I should say the chief of staff to the president of DePaul. And I happened to talk with the chief of staff about this partnership that we have. And so he basically said, you know what, you should talk to these people here at this museum, come down. And they came down and we talked, and I told them about this partnership that we have with these studios that create anything from games to, to fabrication, into software and such. And the museum had some initiatives that they wanted to do, but they didn't know who to go to at DePaul. So I became that hub. And I bring that up because that was always a goal of mine, was to have the Innovation Center be a hub of information for people outside of DePaul. So when a museum or company has a project or has some ideas, they know who to go to. Instead of going to 3 or 4 different departments, they can come to the Jarvis Center and talk to me, and then I get them hooked up with the right people, to get their initiatives going. And so again, that was just, my relationship with the chief of staff with the president, or my relationship with other, administration within DePaul, to kind of get the word out that, that there's one place that people can go to. And so from there, the network grows. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. Oh, and also, I think that you do it so naturally that you might not think of the things that other people don't do very naturally. But
Mm,
just the very fact that you were able to put together, as you mentioned, a speaker series of friends, and the speaker series was a lot of people who are like very compelling individuals. That you were able to do that with a network is not something that everybody's able to do. There are not a lot of people who can wave a wand and get, I don't know how many people you brought in, but let's say 10, 12,
mhm.
however many people, compelling speakers to come through just because they have a network like that, And so there's something that you do related to relationship building that I think a lot of folks could learn from, in these centers, because there's the concept of bringing the outside in. How do you look
Yeah,
outside of yourself and find things that could benefit the community that you're shepherding, and then bring it into that community and do it in a way that connects the dots that other people don't see. I think that's something
sure.
you're good at, is you connect those.
Oh.
If you don't mind me saying that, like being presumptuous here, but that's something that you're good at, is connecting those dots, and that's incredibly important.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it's just, it's decades of networking, all the way from my early days in video games through, running my own company and working with large publishers and such. And, you know, that, you know, that network keeps growing and such, and people introduce me to other people and so, and so I think that's one of the things that has benefited the center. Again, not to toot my own horn or anything, but it was just kind of like bringing in somebody that wasn't from academia to run the center.
Yeah.
I think that was a very interesting call by the dean to do that. And obviously, yeah, I'm super happy that she made that call. But I think that has really benefited because now you have someone like me who brings in people from the outside world, but also still partnering with people who are faculty members for a long time who also can help suggest things from their end. And so now we get the best of both worlds kind of colliding in the same
Right.
space.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I see as kind of like the future of these spaces within academia. I think that whether it's an innovation center in a larger organization, in a city, or in an academic institution, they all provide that kind of benefit. So, wrapping it up, that being part of your future, you open up the newspaper. I don't know, 2-3 years from now,
Uh-huh.
and are you familiar with this exercise? You open up the
N-
newspaper, and the big story is something about your innovation center,
mm.
right? What does the headline say, and what's that story about? What's the future look
Oh,
like?
geez. How many years from now? Two?
2, 3, 2. Yeah, let's do 2, 3.
2 or 3? I think, oh my gosh. I wish I had known this question was going to come
Sorry,
up.
this is a fun question. So I love doing this
Yeah, no, it
question.
is fun.
I'll fill the gap while you think for a second. I love doing this question because the headline thing is really like, where do you want to go, and what are other people going to? What's the thing that grabs other people? It's not just about where you want to go, but if it's a headline in a newspaper, it's also something that other people want to read about. So it's not just about
Mm.
what you want, but it's about what other people, how you want other people to benefit from what you're doing and attach to it.
I think it's what I would like to see, and I'm going to keep this slightly broad, is a headline stating that a part, specific initiative or project or something that was born out of the center, and it could be attached to any school and stuff, had basically had allowed that part of DePaul to be like ranked number one,
Mm,
amongst universities for this particular program.
right.
So I'll speak just selfishly from from my background is if I can see that, let's say the game development department of DePaul is ranked like number one in the nation because of initiatives that we put into place,
Mm.
that would be fantastic.
Right. Right. Yeah. A piece that name drops a couple projects that were incubated in the innovation center,
Exactly.
number one. And then here's like 5 projects that happened, and 4 out of the 5 were seeded or supported in the center.
Exactly, exactly. So it doesn't have to even name drop the center itself, but just knowing that, hey, this wouldn't have happened if the center wasn't there because, you know, I don't know, it's like because of something that we put in there that somebody figured out that was just super innovative and very different.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Josh, that about wraps it up. Is there anything that you're working on or that you'd like to share with folks that you want them to go to, pay attention to? Is there a website? Where can we find what you're working on online?
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously just going to DePaul website, looking up the Jarvis Innovation Center, for any information there. I think you know, in terms of what we're working on, I think this Jarvis challenge that we're putting together is really our next big thing. The first year of it, we're kind of keeping the scale relatively small, just because we're testing it out. It's the first time we're doing it, but this is something that we're looking to grow quite a bit to the point where we want people to be inspired to make big projects. It's not just something that's within their silo, but it's something that they can never imagine happening if they didn't get the support of a challenge like this with all the funding and mentoring and everything that comes with it. I didn't really get into details earlier, but it's basically a challenge where not only would teams from all over DePaul pitch a project that has to be interdisciplinary in nature, but has to be of a certain scale that might be beyond what they can actually do, but with the right resources that the Jarvis Center can supply to them, that they can get it there or can get it close to there. So by the end of the academic year, they have something really big to show off, not just for the school, but for themselves. And later on, when they go off looking for jobs, they can say they can be a part of something. And so we're looking to get that started. It's been on my mind ever since I first started in this position. And I didn't really want to pull the trigger on it until I really understood what the center is capable of, what students are capable of, what other resources are within the school. But now I think we're really close to being ready to get that launched. So I'm super excited about that.
Awesome. Josh, I can't thank you enough. Like I said, this is below your station. So I
Oh,
appreciate you
geez.
joining me and doing this. And I think there's a lot in here for people to dig into. So thanks for your time and for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me. Loved it and had a great time. Thanks.
Cool. All right.